This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Well, in our first introductory lecture, we got introduced to all the different taxes. Those taxes that impacted on the individual, taxes that impacted on companies there. And we spoke about each of those taxes and the different components of each tax that would concern us within the syllabus. Going through the range of personal taxes, income tax, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, through to corporation tax, the tax on corporations, of course, there on limited companies. Also, then we looked at a business-based taxation, and that was VAT, value-added tax, as we will know it. Now, each of those taxes, of course, is going to be tested within this examination. The structure of the exam we now need to look at to see how and where these different taxes are likely to be tested. What we used to have was a choice of either a paper-based or indeed the computer-based examination so far as Tax UK was concerned. We're now left with, as you will see from now onwards, purely a computer-based examination. So the syllabus will be assessed on a 3-hour computer-based examination. Now the paper is going to contain both computational and discursive elements. Again, at this level, as compared to advanced taxation that you may choose to go on to in your later studies, we are far more computational based. But as we said in the terms of our previous lecture, the examining team have attempted to try to bridge somewhat that gap between what was purely computational, that now we call it the Tax UK paper, and what was the advanced taxation paper. So more discursive elements have come in. And you'll find those, as we'll discuss in a moment's time, principally within Section C. But in terms of this paper, mostly computational, and all questions are compulsory. So there's no choice in the matter, which, again, you might think is a bad thing. In some ways it isn't, because, again, where we have had choice in years gone by in terms of exams, students have often got confused and spent too much time over making that choice, or sometimes made the wrong choice. Now, you've just got to get on with it and deal with it. We'll talk about exam technique, of course, of how you adapt to more problematical problems in a few minutes' time. Some questions will adopt a scenario or case study approach. Again, that is very much the style of advanced taxation, and we're going to get a sample of that now, but in a very gentle manner, a very benign fashion is the way it will be tested here. Now, it will be a familiar format to those of you who've done already some of the ACCA papers, in as much as we've got Section A, Section B and Section C. Now, we've mentioned the 5 big taxes there. Let's just look at how and where they will be tested, the things that we can be almost sure of. Well, to begin with, in Section C, we can be sure of something, and that is that we're going to have, in addition to 1 10-mark question, 2 15-mark constructed response. That's a fancy title. Constructed response, i.e. it requires written answers. Now, when I say written, that doesn't necessarily mean we're talking about a narrative answer. It will be a mix of still mostly computational, but some written work as well. Now, the thing that we are told about in terms of these 2 questions, as this note says here, is that those 2 15-mark questions will focus on income tax and corporation tax. Focus. So there may be other bits involved, but they're going to focus principally on those 2 taxes. So there we go. The 2 big taxes have the 2 biggest questions allocated to them on this examination paper. The 2 biggest taxes, income tax and corporation tax there. Now, we'll also see that, and in terms of the way in which they're tested, what will they be testing you on? Again, it varies, but principally, of course, in terms of income tax, some aspect of, or the entirety of, the income tax computation will be required of you. Now, inevitably, that particular question, covering, if it does, the entire income tax computation, will still have a focus on one main area. And one of the main areas that does get tested a lot in terms of the style of question that we see here is employment income, something we'll be looking at in Chapter 9. Now, for most taxpayers, employment income is very simple. It is their salary or wage that they receive at the end of the week or at the end of the month. But we're going to see a very much more interesting scenario, as we spoke of in our first introductory lecture, where in addition to any salary or wage, there may be a bonus that is paid to that individual. There may be a range of benefits that are provided by the employer to the employee. There may be certain expenses incurred by that individual. Are they allowable deductions or are they not? So Chapter 9 is a big chapter, and what we may see is a large chunk of that income tax question devoted to employment income. What will also get in the way of corporation tax is, again, probably in the majority of circumstances, the requirement to prepare the full pro forma corporation tax computation. But that corporation tax computation, of course, will still be, again, dominated by one type of income, that income being trading income. Now, companies, as we said, will be charged on their worldwide income and gains. And income comes in different forms that will be chargeable to UK corporate tax. It's not just trading. There may be some property income that the company has. There may be some interest income. There may also be chargeable gains, all of which feature on the corporate tax computation. But trading income of all the income sources is by far the largest. And what we'll discover, based on some of the discussions we've already had, but we'll have, of course, in detailed chapters later through this course, is in deriving that trading income. There's a lot of work to be done, worthy indeed of the majority, but certainly a lot of the marks devoted to this corporate tax 15-mark question. They would involve, we start the process of preparing a corporation tax computation with the statement of profit or loss, the financial statements there. And what we do is to adjust that net profit at the bottom of our statement of profit or loss to make it acceptable for taxation purposes. And in so doing, we will disallow a particular expense, depreciation, which, although absolutely fine, of course, in terms of financial statements, is not acceptable as an allowable deduction for any accounting period for a business. We're talking now about corporation tax. It will equally be true of the unincorporated trader. But what happens is we replace the disallowed depreciation charge with a system known as capital allowances. And what that does is to provide taxpayers, businesses, unincorporated or now talking about incorporated, with a mechanism by which every business goes through the same system and follows the same rules by which tax relief is gained for the qualifying expenditure on qualifying plant and machinery. So we do away with the depreciation charge, we add it back to our accounting net profit in deriving the taxable trading income, and instead we give capital allowances. Now those are two big areas. Now, of course, not every Section C 15-mark question is going to test the same thing. There will be other areas of corporate tax that may be tested here. Loss reliefs, for example. Companies, any business, incorporated and unincorporated. Sadly, when you set a business up, it doesn't come with a cast iron guarantee that, of course, it will be profitable. And even though most of the time it may be profitable, sometimes, of course, things don't go too well. Sometimes it's not your particular fault there. Things go wrong in the economy, but it's still your loss. So if HMRC, as they will tax us on profits, they've got to give us relief for losses. And that area, corporate tax losses, is an area that, again, would give itself over to the majority of a 15-mark corporate tax question. So we are definitely going to see an income tax and a corporation tax 15-mark question. Again, they probably on the majority of occasions, but not every occasion, require the preparation of an income tax computation that we look at within Chapter 2, which will be the first taught chapter so far as our course is concerned. Chapter 1 is just a general introduction to taxation, which you may or may not choose to go through from the very beginning, but at least you can have a quick skim read through to get the ideas behind it. But the stuff then you really do have to focus your attention on right from the very outset begins with Chapter 2, the income tax computation. Things that we look at in the income tax area. I mentioned a moment ago adjustment of profits and capital allowances. We learn for both the unincorporated trader and, with some differences noted in the corporate tax chapters, we learn for corporate tax as well. So we get introduced to the corporation tax computation in, I think it's chapter 16 there. So these are two big areas. So that's the two main taxes with the two biggest questions. Now there is another question here, a 10-mark question. Now then, that has been the one that has tended in recent times to be the one that's just a little bit different. The one that is more planning based. The one that is more discursive. Lots of written work potentially, as well as a little bit of numerical work to apply here. Again, questions will vary. But it's that one that attempts, as we said earlier, to bridge the gap between Tax UK as paper, as it's now known, and the Advanced Taxation paper. And what it will do is to take often a multi-tax approach, looking not at an individual taxation, either for the individual or, of course, for a company there, but looking at a multi-tax problem. That's more particular to individuals, to be fair, than it is to corporate taxation and companies. But looking at an individual, for example, an individual has decided, I'm fed up with being an employee and working for somebody else. I will work for myself. So I'm going to set up my own business. Right. There's a choice of business medium to be made. What does that mean? It means, to keep it simple, and you run your business as an unincorporated trade, or if there's two or more of you, you set up a partnership there. Now, again, if it's unincorporated, any profits that are made, adjusted for taxation, will be chargeable to income tax as they arise. Again, it doesn't matter so far as an unincorporated trade is concerned how much money, cash, you may take out of your business. The individual will be assessed on the adjusted trading profit, or the tax adjusted trading profit of that business. If you're a partner in a partnership, as you'll discover again in a later chapter, chapter 8 for partnerships there, you will be doing exactly the same process of adjusting up the statement of profit or loss of the partnership, and you as a partner, you will be assessed on your share of that profit. So we're going to look at the income tax issues that pertain to running the business as an unincorporated trade. But that trading income, being earned income, is subject to another tax, and that, of course, is national insurance contributions. Again, those national insurance contributions will come in two forms. We'll discuss them, don't worry, in the detailed chapter. But NICs, national insurance contributions, will be chargeable. So that can be tested. So you could go down the unincorporated route. But equally, you could set up a company and go down the incorporated route. So that would mean that the company makes the profit. The company is then subject to corporation tax on those profits. The individual, the unincorporated trader, was subject to income tax on their adjusted profit. If we go down the incorporated route, as we've said, is the company, and will now be chargeable on what we'll call its taxable total profit to corporation tax there. But of course, what do you, the individual, the owner, manager of that company that you have set up? You're the owner, so you own the shares in the company, and you're the manager, the managing director of that company. It is an owner-managed company. What are you taxed on? Well, you will be taxed on what you take out of that company. Well, how can an owner-manager take money out of their company? Simple. In their capacity as owner, owning the shares, they can pay themselves dividends on their shares. And in their capacity as managing director, owner-manager, as MD, managing director there, they may pay themselves a salary. And that, as we spoke of a moment ago in terms of employment income, could be topped up with various assessable benefits there. So you would have to deal with the taxation of the company, and then the extraction of the profits of the company by the owner-manager through either or both of two routes, the dividend route and, of course, the salary route there. And any salary that you pay yourself just as with the unincorporated trader suffering not just income tax but also national insurance contributions, so does the employee suffer national insurance contributions on their employment income. So we're looking at a range of taxes. Now let's be sensible about this in terms of this 10-mark question. There is a serious limit on how much they can test you on. And what they do is do not leave it as just a general open-ended question. So this is the situation, setting up the business, it's going to be making these profits, we're going to be taking this much of those profits out of the business. Advise? No. You'll be led through it in terms of the requirements. Now that is not something you can do having studied any one chapter within this particular text, within our study notes. It's why it's the final chapter, tax planning style questions, that attempts to bring the individual taxes, the things that you've studied within each tax, together to look at this type of scenario, whereby we can work out, of course, there, not just what the total tax charges are, though that may be a requirement. We could even work out what the individual really wants to know, and that is, well, which route will leave me, the taxpayer, after all taxes have been paid, with the maximum net cash after tax, in my pocket. So that could be an issue. Though again, that is stretching it for this exam. That is very much more the domain of advanced taxation. Now again, be realistic. That might sound a little bit scary in terms of some of the things and the ranging across different taxes that I've spoken of. But this is only a 10-mark question. So they're going to be very precise and very reasonable in terms of the requirements that they set for you on any such question. But it's a good introduction to the things that you'll need to be able to do at advanced taxation. Because when, say, an individual in that situation comes to you in practice, they don't just say, could you please tell me what my income tax position is? They say, here I am, this is what I intend to do. Can you tell me now what taxes will be involved and how much of each tax will have to be paid, and therefore what will I be left with after all taxes? That's our job as the accountant, to tell our client those things. But again, you will only get a very small cross-section of that for what is a mere 10 marks, as we're seeing there. That will go up to maybe 20, 25, 30 marks when you move on to look at advanced taxation. Okay, so that 10 marker there is going to be on different taxes. It's going to be a multi-tax scenario. You will find out a lot more about that after you've studied each individual taxation and you've then studied through and worked the examples within chapter 26. You'll get mention of it as well as we go through some of the individual chapters. I'll be making brief reference to say, well, look at that situation there. That could be a topic indeed that is going to be involved in terms of tax planning. But most of that stuff is found in chapter 26. Okay, so we've got the two big taxes, which are going to be predominant within the section C of the paper. We've got one 10 mark, two 15 marks, so there's 40 marks there. And these are written answers that we are producing, albeit on our computer there. Now, again, if you don't choose to do section C first within the examination, it's your call as to which particular questions you answer first. But if you choose to go through in order, section A, section B, and finally to section C, make absolutely certain that you leave yourself sufficient time to be able to answer all three questions within that section. Make sure you give yourself your full-time allocation. This section is critical to your examination well-being, shall I call it. You may like the idea of objective testing questions. I don't want to worry you here, but objective testing questions are more difficult in many ways in terms of passing the exam here than section C. With written response questions, you get rewarded for what you do. You do an exercise, a calculation, make a statement that is correct. You can earn a half a mark, 1 mark, 1.5, 2 marks there. 2 marks I've gone up to with that. you could get any part of that. Whatever you get right, you are rewarded for. But an objective testing question, we're going to turn our attention now to section A, which is these 15 2-mark objective testing questions. So 30 marks to be had here. And with an objective testing question for 2 marks, it's all or nothing. There may be 2, 3, 4 steps that you have to take to get to that final correct answer. And you pick the correct one, you get all 2 marks. If you pick the wrong one, you get no marks. Now, in terms of those solutions offered, they're not, of course, 1 right answer and 3 ridiculous figures that have no significance and no meaning at all. The examiners have thought these out. They are responses that could be worked by the student who is not able to fully understand and complete the exercise. And this is the problem with these objective testing questions. They're all or nothing, which is great if you get it all, the full 2 marks. But if you get halfway, 3/4 of the way to getting it right, in section C on a 2-mark part, if you got it 3/4 right, you get 1.5 marks. In a section A objective testing question, you get nothing. So you must make certain that you leave yourself sufficient time to be able to get good responses down to section C. Because that is where, although yes, there may be things that you can't do or you can't fully do, you will be rewarded positively for the things that you do right. You can get the 0.5 marks, the 1 marks, the 1.5. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's right or it's wrong. Now in section A, therefore, again, we have that as an issue. Now hopefully it won't be a problem because we will be able to compute the correct figure there or identify the correct statement that has been made out of those provided to you, what is right, what is wrong, etc. there. But be careful with, again, the specific requirement. It is a very obvious statement for me to now make. Read the questions requirements carefully. But what you've now got is a whole lot more questions. Back in the good old days, we might have to do 5 questions, so 5 requirements, albeit some would have subsections there. But equally, any of those subsections of those questions, for the marks allocated to it, you could get parts thereof. Now it's all or nothing. And again, often we are too eager to start getting buttons pressed on our calculator to try to work numbers to come up with one of the numbers are offered to us as being the answers there. Now we have to be very careful about reading the requirement carefully. For example, and we won't fully appreciate this yet, and I will remind you as we go through, when we prepare an income tax computation, now we could be asked to compute purely the figure of taxable income, the amount of income by its name that is taxable, that is chargeable to tax. We could be asked to compute an income tax liability, or we could be asked to compute an income tax payable. Now, all of these outcomes are different. In the case of income tax liability and income tax payable, they may be different, they may be one and the same. Trust me, in terms of an objective testing question, they would give you sufficient information to be able to compute either tax liability or tax payable. You have to make sure you picked up the right one. So you've got to read the question carefully. In terms of capital gains tax, you could be asked to compute the taxable gain. Or prior to that even, you could be asked to compute the chargeable gain. So is it the chargeable gain made? Is it the taxable gain made? Is it the CGT liability that they're asking you to compute based on the information provided within the question? So it is critical that you read that requirement very carefully indeed. Do not rush in to press the buttons on your calculator. Make sure you've understood what that question is asking you to do. Because remember, On those questions, it's all or nothing. You misunderstand the requirement, you will invest time in that question, and it will be time wasted, because at the end of that time you spend, you are guaranteed to come out with the wrong answer because you've not read the requirement of the question carefully enough. So again, be careful in relation to those. Now, in terms of Section A, we know, therefore, you'll be used to by now the style of question. I'm just forewarning you, in terms of taxation, there are many requirements that may sound the same, but are different in some way, shape or form. It's critical that you've understood the real requirement of that particular question. And what you'll see in Section A is a range of taxes. You could have questions on all of the taxes. It's a balancing act. Depending on what they've done in Section B, which I'll come to in a moment, and Section C, Section A then picks up the pieces. Again, students often like the idea of objective testing question. It's not always this way. We're now with computer-based exams, but you're thinking, well, the answer's there. All I've got to do is find it, therefore. Not as easy sometimes as we think. And what we've got to make sure of, therefore, is that, as I say, why it's not always as the benefit to students that you sometimes think it is it allows the examiners to spread across the syllabus. So rather than narrowly defining the requirements of a question when they're big written questions, prepare an income tax comp, prepare a corporation tax comp, calculate the CGT liability or IHT payable in relation to the individual, it now enables a more micro analysis of the syllabus to pick out individual areas that are not covered elsewhere. Now, it is almost certain here that you will find certain of those questions that you can't do. Again, in terms of the content of our study notes, I will never, ever guarantee that every possible examination question you might see, very specifically in Section A, that you will have the ability to get that right. We are producing a set of notes that are about, well, a small fraction of the size of study manuals. If you want to try to know everything, you need your study manual there from one of the approved providers, of course, and very good they are. What we're doing in terms of our notes and these lectures is to provide you with the ability to pass this examination. Now, if you want to go on from that and do more, fantastic. But if you choose to do that, do it after you've actually got the basics understood. Be very careful not to invest a ridiculous amount of time in what are very, very or relatively small areas. You make sure you cover these notes first of all. When you practice, as you will need an exam kit, a revision kit, again from one of those ACCA approved providers there. In working those questions, that's where you may have to revert to a study manual, for example, for the occasional question where I haven't seen that before. So what we are doing is to give you a set of notes that allows you, as thousands of students before you have done, to pass this examination. That is our objective. It would be nice to see you getting 100 marks, but it is imperative that you score 50 marks. That's the difference here. Now, certainly in terms of performance that I've seen for students when they report back after exams each year, students have been able to score a lot more than 50. Trust me on that, a lot more. But what you've got to do is to get the basics thoroughly understood. So, Section A, you will find questions that go into some fine point, possibly in some detail. Don't worry about it. Leave it alone. What you mustn't be doing is, if there are, say, as there may be, 3 or 4 of the 15 objective testing questions that are particularly difficult for you, and you're really struggling to know what to do and how to do it, don't waste your time on those at the beginning of the exam, if you've chosen Section A to do first here. Because if you have those, let's say, 4 questions that are particularly troublesome for you, and we spend 3, 4, 5 minutes on each of those questions, possibly banging our heads against the proverbial brick wall. Suddenly, you've spent 3, 4, 5 minutes on 4 questions and you've earned nothing. So you have spent there sufficient time that could have been devoted to, say, the 10-mark question in section C. And you've let that time slip by with no reward. Which is why, if you do start with section A, you make sure you go through and you pick out those exercises that you are confident with. You know, you've read the requirement, you've understood the requirement, you can do the calculations, or you can identify the correct statement or statements there. And you make sure you get those right. If there are things that you simply cannot do or find very difficult to do, leave it. Leave it until the end of the exam. And if in the final minute of the exam there are 2 or 3 Section A objective testing questions that you still don't know, pick your favourite letter. Go with your favourite there. But what you must ensure is that within the 3 hours that you have available to you, that you have secured from that exam, the one in front of you, you have secured every possible mark that your knowledge would have allowed you to secure, and not lost out on marks that you could and you should have scored. Why? Because you were chasing and using up time the marks that you weren't able to score. So be sensible. This is what basic exam technique is all about. Exam technique is very simple. It means that based on the knowledge that you take into the examination room with you, you are able to exploit that knowledge to ensure that you do secure the marks that you could and should score. Students with the capacity to pass this exam, who fail the exam, fail that test. What they've done is to waste time doing things that they shouldn't be doing because they don't know how to do them, and they've missed out on marks that they could and should have got. So you maximise your time, your performance in terms of securing those marks. All right. Section A, across the board, 15 objective testing questions. Don't waste time banging head against a brick wall on the really difficult ones that are difficult for you, that is. Hopefully there won't be any of those. You'll think, oh yeah, easy, bring it on. Test me, why don't you, Mr. Examiner here, or Mrs. Examiner, I should also say. But don't waste time and make sure you've read the requirement carefully. In terms of Section C, big income tax, big corporation tax question, and probably a mix, a multi-tax question for the 10-marker. So what that means we're left with in terms of Section B, 3 questions. Again, we're in objective testing question format. 5 objective questions of 2 marks based on the scenario laid down for you. Now, again, you'll be led through this. Again, they're not as challenging as we might think. But let's think what's going to be tested here, or probably is going to be tested here. And we've got income tax, we've got corporation tax. In terms of the 10 mark, it could be a bit of everything, say including national insurance contributions. Section A is a mix of everything. Again, it could be every tax there. So the main objective of these 3 questions is picking up on the other taxes. The remaining 2 personal taxes, so we've got capital gains tax and inheritance tax. And, of course, the indirect taxation, as we know it, VAT. So we're likely to see those 3 questions focused in on those 3 taxes there. Now, again, you may not be able to do correctly each of the 5 questions on each of those taxes. Don't waste your time in terms of things that are too demanding, you can't do it. Or you think, I'm not sure about this. Make sure on a first run through anyway, you picked out and you have properly performed on each of those questions that you could and should get right, and you've nailed it. You've got those marks, and then you move on. Again, 3 hours sounds like a long time, but I'm sure you've done exams before, and you may have discovered in the past, and you certainly will in the future, that 3 hours is not as long as you think, and therefore it will go very quickly. You cannot afford to waste any time here, and you've got to make sure with every one of those now, so many requirements, 15 objective testing questions across the board, section A. 3 lots of 5, another 15 objective testing questions then in terms of section B, and then the 3 big questions, and certainly the income and corporation tax questions could be broken down, and probably will be broken down into subsections. Do this for 9 marks, do this for 6, do this for 10, do this for 3, do this for 2, etc. there. They'll be broken down. There's a lot of things to be done. Make sure you read the requirements carefully, make sure you answer those requirements specifically, and make sure you don't waste time at the expense of missing out on other marks elsewhere on the paper that you could and should score. Now, all of that, of course, is exam day. Between now and then, you've got to be prepared for that. So the first part of the course is for you, therefore, to ensure as we go through each of the taxes, the first tax we'll be looking at will be income tax. The first main tax, personal tax, will be income tax that we look at, where we'll be kicking off with Chapter 2, the introduction to the income tax computation there. And we'll take it from there. We'll then go through for capital gains tax for the individual. We'll move to corporation tax and then chargeable gains that are subject to corporate tax, before finally through to inheritance tax and value added tax there. Now you've got to make sure that as we go through, you do all the exercises, you follow the lectures through, you do the exercises that I'll take you through, you do the exercises that I assign you to do, you do the exercises and the additional reading that is determined at the end of each chapter. Sometimes students ask me the question about, oh, you've said about do practice question this and practice question that. Where are they? If you look at your contents page, at the first page of these notes, you'll see that they are tucked in at the very end of these notes. So do make sure you know where to find them, and only do them as allocated to you following each chapter. Once you've done all the chapters, if there are any outstanding ones, which I don't think there will be, then you can do those. What you'll also need as part of the essential material to prepare you for the Tax UK examination is an exam kit. Now, the exam kit must be the relevant exam kit for the particular exam that you are sitting. And of course, it must be from one of the approved ACCA providers. In terms of the relevant exam kit, based on the exam that you're sitting, up until and including the March 2020 exam, that is Finance Act 2018, but as most of you listening to this will be taking it from June 2020 through to March 2021, you need Finance Act 2019. So I repeat, for those of you taking exams between June 2020 and March 2021, the relevant material for you for each of the sittings will be Finance Act 2019. Now, what is essential, as I've said, is an exam kit. The exam kit gives you the essential practice. This is very much a doing exercise. Tax is a rule-based subject. There are lots and lots of different rules that need to be learnt. Some of them particularly strange, as you'll go on to see through the course of these studies. But they need to be learnt, and the only way you're going to learn them is by practicing there. Now, as we've mentioned, there is practice within the material provided to you by OpenTuition, both in terms of examples and practice examples and illustrations within the study material, within those study notes. But that's basic. What you must have then is the backup, the detailed examination kit. That will give you more than sufficient practice across the board in terms of each of the taxes that you need to know about, as we have just discussed. Sometimes students ask, well, what about a study manual? Well, you don't need a study manual. It's not essential to pass this exam. To pass the exam, what you do need, you must go through all of the study notes in conjunction with the available lectures that we provide for you, and then you must have that exam kit. Where will you use that exam kit? Well, it will be structured according to the different taxes for most of the content anyway. And once we've completed through our studies each individual tax, be that income tax, be it capital gains tax, be it inheritance tax, these are all the personal taxes, or be it corporate tax and VAT there, the principal business taxes. Whichever it is, for each of those sections, there will be a whole range of questions, both Section A, Section B and Section C questions where appropriate. You need that practice. Now, what I'd suggest to you is once you've completed our OpenTuition studies, the study notes, the lectures on a particular tax, you've done the relevant practice questions and all the examples that are within the chapters and the practice examples at the end of the book there. Once you've done those, then take a selection of the available questions from your specific exam kit in that particular tax. Don't try and do them all. You need to get some basic practice on that. If you do about half of them, then the other half you can do as revision. At that time, you can also go back and do the half you've already covered on the tuition stage. But it is only by doing that, by getting that essential practice, that you're going to learn the stuff that you need to know so that you can reproduce that in the examination room. Now, as regards to study manuals, I say you don't need that to get a good pass in the exam. But what you will find is that there are certain, most specifically Section A objective testing questions, where there is detailed knowledge that is tested. And that won't be contained all the time within the material that we have provided to you. That is how we turn what is several hundred pages worth of material provided to you by the main ACCA providers into 120, 130, 40, 50 pages there. That's how we do it. We've done the editing job basically for you. That is what you need to know. So that comes first. So if you already have a study manual, do not sit there reading that study manual cover to cover. It's not an effective way of working. What you do, lectures, study notes on each of the various chapters and the taxes that, as I said, that OpenTuition provide for you. If then when you do the exam kit questions, you come across a question where you're thinking, oh, don't know this, haven't seen this, then use your study manual, if you've chosen to get one, as a reference book, somewhere where you can find that detail should you need it. But you are never going to sit down and read several hundred pages of that book and retain that. What is in the notes that we've given to you, that's what you need to know. That must be your focus. Don't start getting worried about individual objective testing questions that have been produced not by the examiner, but by the provider, the ACCA material provider there. And some of those go way over the top in terms of the content and the detail. Don't worry about that. Obviously, you don't want to be getting them wrong time and time again, one after the other. But the odd OT question that you don't get, objective testing question, is not a problem. So, exam kit, yes. Study manual, it's up to you. If you can afford it, if you've got the money available to do it, then of course make that investment. It's there, it's a comfort blanket, it's a reference material should you need to look things up. Great. But if you can't afford it, well, it's not going to, or should not do you any harm here, I would add, if you do as I've asked you to do. So, you know the material that you need to have. We know the approach that we're going to take through study notes, lectures and chapters combined together. Where we'll be starting our detailed study of taxes will be with income tax. In the next lecture, you see, that's going to be for Chapter 2. You might ask, well, what's happened to Chapter 1? Chapter 2 is when it all kicks off as a doing exercise for income tax. And we've got several very big chapters in relation to income tax. Substantively, it is the biggest area in terms of work that you need to do. And that kicks off with a seriously large chapter, Chapter 2, that we'll be looking forward to taking you through bit by bit. Chapter 1 is a general introduction to taxation, a few more interesting areas in there in terms of exam content. We'll be looking at, for example, the basic differences between what is tax evasion and what is tax avoidance. Every one of us as a taxpayer is perfectly well permitted to be able to arrange their taxation affairs in such a way as to mitigate their overall tax liability. That's tax avoidance, essentially. Tax evasion is where, well, that's illegal there. That's not telling them something that needs to be told to them, or giving them incorrect information, deliberately therefore seeking to evade taxation. So that bit, fine, we need to know. You don't need to do this, by the way, before we move to Chapter 2. Chapter 2, along with the admin sections, which are Chapter 15 for the personal taxes, and Chapter 23, I think it is, in terms of corporate tax there. Those are self-study. It's the sort of thing that you sit down and learn rather closer to the date. Again, it's an old expression, I know, but I can't learn it for you. Only you can learn it for yourself. But there's no point if you are now several weeks or months, indeed, prior to the exam, trying to learn all the basic admin rules, because give it 2 or 3 weeks, they're likely to have slipped your memory. There's only one time where you need to know those basic rules. That's the day of the exam. So I never encourage end loading in terms of studies, leaving it until the end of your studies. But that's one area where I would say do that. All as I keep calling them, the doing exercises, how to structure a computation, what are the rules by which we include items within the computation for corporation tax, for income tax, for CGT, for IHT, for VAT, how do we do national insurance contribution calculations. Those are all the things that you need to be well versed in before you start worrying about admin. Okay, well, as said, next time I'll see you, we'll be looking at Chapter 2, a very big chapter that will introduce you to, and by the end of it, you'll be able to prepare an income tax computation, computing for a taxpayer, both their taxable income and their income tax liability, and if necessary, income tax payable. But that awaits us next time around. We'll see you then.